Thanks everyone for being here. My name is Mike Prysner. I'm a co-founder of an organization of soldiers, active duty soldiers and veterans called March Forward. And I also was a former member of the US Army and deployed to Iraq in March of 2003 as a part of the initial invasion when I was 19 years old. And I think the pictures we saw moments ago kind of speak for me. You know, going to Iraq in 2003, believing what I was told, that we're going to help the Iraqi people to bring them a better life, to defend our friends and family back at home. It took 12 months occupying that country of seeing young children crying hysterically as we ripped them from their homes, of seeing a man shot through the neck, brought to a prison cell instead of being brought to a hospital, seeing men sob uncontrollably and urinate themselves in detention facilities during interrogation. All of that pain and suffering made me see that there is no way in hell that this was a war of liberation. This was something else. And what I was a part of was defined at the Nuremberg trials as the most supreme crime against humanity, and that's the illegal war of aggression against a sovereign nation. Now, in that war, over 1 million Iraqis were killed. Over 1 million human beings perished, not including the million that died before in Iraq as a result of the sanctions and the bombings by the United States. But 1 million died and are still dying. And for what? For a war based on lies. You know, we are told that there is this threat of weapons of mass destruction, and not only did it turn out that there were no weapons of mass destruction, but that when the politicians and the generals were presenting the evidence, that they knew that it was fabricated. They knew that it was a lie. And they sold it to us anyway. And they sent thousands of us to our deaths, tens of thousands to be maimed, hundreds of thousands, perhaps over 1 million to be psychologically traumatized. But you know, the Iraq War is not out of character for the US government. There's nothing new. They actually lie quite a bit. You know, they lied about the Gulf War being to protect the people of Kuwait. They lied about the Vietnam War being to bring democracy to the Vietnamese people. And they lied about every single popular democratic government that they overthrew and installed the most brutal dictator, whether it be in Haiti or Chile or Iran or the countless other examples through US history. And they're lying to us right now as we're launching these very expensive cruise missiles into Libya. I think if we saw these pictures just now, you know, how dare the US government even utter the words humanitarian intervention? You know, we're supposed to believe it's just a coincidence that Libya is Africa's largest oil producer. They're telling us that we have to be in Afghanistan to protect our friends and our family here at home. You know, we're supposed to believe it's just a coincidence that Afghanistan would give the US military machine a foothold in the most strategic and important resource-rich region on the entire planet, one that they had long hoped to dominate and actually tried to develop quite friendly relationships with the Taliban government at the time, with these, plans for oil pipelines and so forth. You know, we're lied about the Iraq War being over, right? The end of combat. I think the 2 soldiers who were killed in combat last week in Iraq, the end of combat was not over for them, not over for the Iraqis whose homes are still raided, who are still shot in the streets, who are still living under occupation. Now, all of these wars from the beginning of this country are based on lies and deceptions. And that's why we're telling the truth today. That's why we must continue to tell the truth. And that's why right now we should remember someone who is paying the ultimate price for telling the truth, someone named Bradley Manning, who is a hero if he indeed did the things he did, a hero because he was telling the truth when all we were getting from this government was lies and lies and lies. And that's why we say we need to free Bradley Manning and put the real war criminals in jail, the generals in the Pentagon, the politicians who lied to us about sending us to these wars. And it's in our interest not just for Bradley Manning to be freed, but for there to be more Bradley Mannings. We need 1,000 Bradley Mannings, because this government is just going to continue to lie. So let's look at right now the current bloodbath in Afghanistan. You know, another war for profit, another war for empire. And what lies are we being told about this war right now? Well, we're being told that there is progress in Afghanistan, that there is these gains being made in Afghanistan, that we're reversing the momentum of the Taliban. That's the slogan they like to use. Well, you know, when President Obama went to Afghanistan and gave that speech saying we're making progress to the 101st Airborne Division, actually the unit sustaining the most amount of casualties in the war right now, the very same day these UN maps were leaked, these classified security maps that showed the exact opposite. That in fact, not only had the US and NATO forces not made gains, but that it was the resistance fighters that were making gains. Not just the Taliban, but by the Pentagon's own numbers, over 1,800 separate armed resistance groups in Afghanistan, showing that this is a popular, widespread struggle against what the Afghan people rightfully see as a foreign occupation for nothing else than seizing access to the country's territory and resources. So we're told of progress, even though this war now is taking far more casualties than it ever has. Doctors in Afghanistan talk about the signature wound, this new signature wound, which is the loss of both legs, and triple amputations for US soldiers. Been recently a 90% increase in wounds to soldiers' genitals. And actually I want to draw your attention to a story just the other day in the New York Times where a White House official report said, quote, "There is no clear path to defeating the insurgency in Afghanistan." This is coming on the heels of major retreats by US forces in Peck Valley and Korangal Valley, where soldiers were told they must fight endlessly there because it is so important to control that area. And then all of a sudden the generals say, well, maybe it's not that important, we should go. But this revelation by the White House is what the generals and politicians have been saying all along, what Robert Gates and Petraeus said behind closed doors that was revealed to the public, that there is no end to the Iraq war, that, as Petraeus said, we fight for the rest of our lives and for the rest of our children's lives. So they're saying that they know this war cannot be won. And so all of those soldiers who are dying there today, all of those soldiers who are losing their legs, who are being psychologically traumatized, are dying in a war that the generals and politicians know they cannot win. But they keep sending those soldiers to be killed, to be blown up, because they don't want to take the responsibility of a political setback, of tarnishing the image of the invincible empire. And so that's why we say to those in the US military that you have the absolute right to refuse your orders to deploy to Afghanistan and Iraq. And that's absolutely what you should do. And if you want to fight for what's really in our interest, fight to end the wars and fight to use all of that money, that's $700 million a day, to meet human need here at home. Now, I want to close by saying that, you know, these wars are for rich men and rich corporations. We can see this very clearly. But if you took a survey of soldiers in the military and asked how many of their parents were executives at oil companies, you know, how many own stock in the defense industry, you know, the answer would be 0. Because when the rich need someone to fight their wars, they get the people that can't afford to go to college, that need health care for their families, that need a home. That's who they send. And you know, those people who send us to war, say we must occupy these countries, they talk a lot about national security, right? It's in our national security interests that we stay and fight endlessly in Afghanistan. Well, I think national security to us means something very different. I think one thing that we learned in the new budget from the Obama administration is that this winter, about 3 million families who receive federal assistance for heating in the Northwest, Midwest, are going to have their heat shut off this winter, are told that they must freeze because there's not enough money. Well, I think that's a national security issue. I think the 1 million homeless school children every year is a national security issue. The 45 million people who cannot go to a doctor or they will go bankrupt I believe that's a national security issue. And those people who cut off our heat, who lay us off from our jobs, who take away our homes, they're the ones who say, when it comes to fighting the wars, that we're all in this together. We're all Americans. We're all one nation. Well, we need to say that we're not all in this together. We're not one nation. Those at the top who tell us we must go to war, who profit from the wars, we don't have anything in common with them. But you know who we do have something in common with? The people of Iraq and Afghanistan, who also are suffering from U.S. foreign policy. Now, if we do this, if we reject this nationalism that says we're in this together with the Wall Street CEOs, with the oil giants, with the millionaire politicians, and replace it with a profound internationalism that says we have common cause, not just with suffering families here in the United States, but all those suffering families abroad, that's when we're really speaking truth to power, and that's when we can win. Sisters and brothers, we can end the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. We can use that money to meet human need, but every change in history comes from a people's movement in communities, in workplaces, in schools, and in the streets. So I hope all of you continue to join us in building that movement. Thank you.